Amen. All right, so good morning. My name's Brad. I'm super glad that you guys are here. If you're a guest with us, please fill out one of those little yellow cards in a bulletin. You could drop it in the box on the way out. That way we can connect with you some way, shape, or form. We'd love to just kind of see what's going on and just kind of see what's happening in your life and see if we might be a good fit for you. We'd love to talk to you in that way. We are going to start a new series for the next couple weeks. Today we're supposed to have a special guest that I was going to kind of do an interview thing with Love Inc. Love Inc. is a organization that we want to introduce to you. We've tried. This is our second time we've tried, but COVID exposure and all that stuff has kind of hindered us from being able to do that. So this series is part of that. So hopefully in the next couple of weeks we'll be able to connect with Love Inc. in some way, shape, or form and kind of go from there. But as I was writing this, the best example I can give is when I was being raised on like how to parent, like what to look out for parenting, like what's going to be hard. I always heard like the terrible twos were going to be hard, or like I always thought like teaching your kid was going to be harder or whatever. No one ever told me that the hardest thing in the world was to teach a kid to keep up with you as you walk through a parking lot. Like it seems like that would be the most basic type thing. So what's funny is, and I'm going to be honest, Malachi was the worst, because we'd be walking and like we're just walking normal, and he's like 25 yards behind me, and so then you're like, dude, come on, and so then he gets up right next to you, and he's sprinting 25 yards ahead of you. Like, why can't you find that middle ground where you just kind of walk right next to me? And the reason I share that is I started thinking about the sermon that we're doing is Life on Mission, and just how sometimes when it comes to living and walking with God, we sometimes are either way behind or way ahead. And we have a hard time just keeping pace for what God actually plans or intends for our life. And it's one of those things, like, I don't know about you, but when I talk to people, they either feel like they're like they've left God in the dust, or they're kind of chasing after God, trying to figure out what he wants them to do. He's trying to figure out where to go, so on and so forth. And I think of Malachi when he's walking with me. I know where I want to go. I know what we're doing. Even when we get up to a road and there's like busy traffic and all of those things, every once in a while you have to put your hand out and be like, stop, because they just want to keep going. And sometimes I feel like God is trying to do that with my life. I feel like he's trying to do that with our lives, where he has a purpose. He knows what he wants us to do in our life, but we are kind of off in our own world. We're off kind of trying to do our own thing, whether it's through our own abilities, whether it's through like how we were raised or whatever it might be. We have a hard time sometimes finding how to be in step with God. And there's a phrase that I want to start off with. It says the heartbeat of God is that he would be worshiped among all people. The heartbeat of God. If you ask the question, what does God desire? What does God want in your life? What does God want the church to do? What does he want? And the whole idea is that he wants every person to worship him, to be saved, to bring glory to him. And so my question is that something that's important to us? Is that something that is, and are we responsible for that? Where does your responsibility begin? Where does it end? Where does my responsibility begin? Where does it end? Where does the church's responsibility, where does it begin and where does it end? How does that all work together? In Psalms 46:10, it says, I will be exalted among the nations. I will be exalted in all the earth. If that's what God desires, if this is what God, his goal in the end is, and if we were going to talk about end time stuff, we always say, when is Jesus going to come back? One of the big phrases or statements out there is when everyone has heard the message of Jesus. You ever hear that statement? Like, well, once everyone has the opportunity to become Christians, once everyone has heard the message, then Christ will come back. Whether they accept it or not, that's going to be up to them, but that's when God will come back. And so even with that, I will be exalted among the nations. I will be exalted on the earth. That is God's mission, is that every person will exalt his name. And so what that means is, if that's what his mission is, that means that we all should be sharing in that mission. If you're going to fill in your blanks this morning, I'm just going to cut straight to the chase, is that we are called to be everyday missionaries. We are called to be everyday missionaries. And so it's one of those things I would love, and I think I've shared this before. Like when we have a missionary come in, we have them come in and we kind of want them to prove what they're doing in the name of God wherever they're at. Like if they're a mission that we support, we want to know that our money is going somewhere that's going to be used for God's kingdom, right? So when they come in, they're going to show pictures of children, like feeding children. They're going to show them helping in some way, shape, or form medically sometimes, or they're going to get like clothing or whatever it might be. They're always going to show that the picture of whoever's in charge, just kind of in a goofy picture, because that's what missionaries do. And then they're going to show the picture of them baptizing 1 or 2 or 12 people, whatever, because like we want people to give their life to Christ and we want them to live for Jesus. They're going to do all of those things because they want to give you a snapshot that missions reaching lost people is important. What if we had an assignment where I looked at you and said, I want you to put together a slideshow of how God's mission is important to you? What would it look like? Like, would it have maybe a mission trip you went on? Would it have maybe your Sunday school class? Would it have maybe the lady that works behind the counter at the gas station that you're at? I don't know. And maybe some of us would have rockin' videos. Maybe some of us are like, yeah, I live on mission. I live for God's purposes. So what I want to do this morning is, if that's you, I want you to continue living that. If not, I want us to be aware of what God's mission is for his people. And asking that question, are we accomplishing that? Because like I said, the last couple weeks we talked about living generously. We talked about getting to the point in your life where you can live generously in all aspects, in all kinds of, whether it's financial time, your stuff, whatever it might be, putting yourself in a place where God can use you and your stuff for his glory. And for us to kind of be changed on the inside to become more generous with all of those things, to allow God to kind of move in our life. But for what purpose? And it should be to accomplish God's mission. If you look down on the bottom of that PowerPoint or in your notes, I have everyday missionaries are those who practice a life on mission where God has placed them. And everyday missionaries are those who practice a life on mission where God has placed them. There's a scripture in Matthew 4:18 through 20. We often use this as the other great commission, where it says, come follow me. Jesus said, and I will make you fishers of men. At once they left their nets and followed him. And when you look at that text, it's kind of like the mission of God is just kind of laid out right there. And I have in mind where it says, come follow me. It's just that's that invitation where every person needs to make that choice to become a disciple of Jesus Christ. And it says, and I will make you. So therefore we are changed. When you make something, you take 2 pieces, put it together, you make something new, or you change it into something else. So therefore we are coming to Christ and we are being made into something else. And then we ask for what purpose, and it's to become what? Fishers of men. And so we are to go out and make disciples again. So let's go back to your little video montage. Would that be part of your video montage? Would you include how you came to Christ, how you gave your life to Jesus, how you surrendered, stopped living for yourself, started living for him? Awesome. Then you started changing. You didn't just simply add Jesus to your belt clip. You didn't simply put on the I love Jesus t-shirt and start walking around. You actually began to change. You became more loving, kind, generous, patient, more self-control, whatever it might be. And in the midst of that, you then reached out to others to become disciples. Like, this is what we should be looking like. This is where our videos should be playing out. In Ephesians 3:20 through 21, it says, now to him who is able to do far more abundantly than all that we ask or think. Remember that part. According to the power at work within us, to him be the glory in the church and in Christ Jesus throughout all generations. But this is the thing. If this is God's mission, if God's mission is that all people are to bring glory to him, and we are the missionaries, that means as parents, as employees, as students, as whatever your title is, whatever title that you have is for the purpose of accomplishing God's mission. That's why we exist. That is our purpose. And when you look at Ephesians 3:20 through 21, and the reason I love this passage is it says that you can do far more abundantly than all that we ask or think. So in other words, you can do so much more than you ever could give yourself credit for in parenting, in teaching, in loving, in being the example of Christ wherever you're placed. Does that make sense? But oftentimes we kind of look at ourselves and we're like, well, I can't do that. I can't rise up to that status. I can't really reach that point. In 1 Corinthians 10:31 says, whether you eat or drink, whatever you do, do everything for God's glory. Do everything for God's glory. I heard this illustration a long time ago, and I love this phrase. And if you want to write it down, it's just an awesome phrase that's impacted me a lot. It says it's intersecting gospel intentionally into everyday routines. So intersecting the gospel intentionally into everyday routines. And the reason I say that is a lot of times what we do is we try to live our lives where like if this is your life and this is all your stuff in your life, like you got your hobbies, your money, your job, your family, and all your identity stuff where like you're a parent, you're a grandparent, you're a golfer, you're whatever, you're a hunter, whatever. You can put all those things in here. And this line goes on and on and on and on and on. What we like to do is we like to take our God line and we like to take it and it runs parallel to our everything else line. And we might kind of dip down into that and be like, okay, so I'm a parent. How should I kind of be, like, how can I pull God into my parenting? Or how can I pull faith into my parenting? Or I'm a business owner. How can I pull like a little bit of faith into my business owning? And so what we have is we have this God line that kind of just jumps up and down into our lives. And the problem is we often feel like in our faith that we are on a roller coaster. We're up, we're down, we're all over the place. See, the issue is the gospel should be intersecting with all of those aspects of our life. It should be going through every one of those other lines. It should be like, so therefore, I don't parent with a little bit of Christian in it. I'm a Christian parent. I have a godly marriage. I am going to be a godly business owner. I am going to be whatever it might be. That's what we are called to do for the purpose of sharing Jesus Christ so that God can be glorified. But I don't know about you guys, though. The thing that kind of hits me is I know on days when I'm super productive, I wake up with the list of things to do. Like if we're going to go camping, I have the list of things I need to put in a camper, the things I need to clean out, all the areas, the order I'm going to do. Like I'm going to make sure I'm going to mow the lawn before I leave. And I get all these things done in a super fast day. But then there's those days, I think some of you might have had a couple of these days recently, where you really don't have a plan and you wake up and you get nothing done. How many of you have had a couple of those in the last couple of days? Okay, like you're kind of like, yeah, and you even sit there and you're like, I don't even know what to do right now. You don't ask your wife because she knows what you should be doing, but you kind of just walk around and you're just kind of like, I don't know what to do with my time a little bit because you don't have the purpose. You don't know what you're trying to accomplish. And that's how we often kind of jump into our faith. And here's the thing of why we do that. we often have a weak gospel foundation. We have a weak view of what mission or missions should look like. And I just typed them up I didn't even make them fill in your notes. The first one is ministry was never just meant to be paid professionals. Ministry was never meant to be by the dude that went to Bible college and just, well, that's the minister's job, or that's where, like, and sadly in our culture, I think this is why the churches have become so weak. It's because we're relying on just a few amount of people to accomplish this great mission. And so therefore we've kind of said, well, that's their job, that's their responsibility. The second thing is we kind of get in this mindset that knowledge equals ministry. That the more I can study, the more devotions I can do, the more Bible verses I can memorize, all these different things, the more Sunday school classes I can attend, which are all amazing, great tools to prepare you to do what? Ministry. If we don't live this out, if we don't have the mentality that we can have an argument about what it means to be a Christian. We can have an argument of the steps of salvation. We can have an argument about all those things, but unless you're really reaching out and sharing that with other people, it's useless information. Living on mission doesn't mean you're just smarter. You're actually using it for something. And the third thing I have on there is understanding biblical mission in ministry. And here's the reason why. I think every person in here would say church is important. But we would ask the question, why? Like we could look at all those little answers that we have that we've learned in Sunday school, and we could give the answers. Like we can be like sometimes we're like Jeopardy, and we're just like, yeah, this is what it is, or this is the answer, and so on and so forth. But when someone asks us the question, why, we're like, oh, well, because. And then we kind of run away in the other direction. Without a proper understanding of biblical mission and ministry, we can go as deep as you want. We can dig really deep, but we won't ever apply it in our life. Until we realize that part of the responsibility of the church is on us, then we really won't take steps to engage in it. We really won't take steps to commit to living out God's mission in our life. Unless we realize that we're part of that mission. Like not just a bystander part, but an important part in God's story, in God's kingdom. See, I don't know about, I grew up in just below the generation where I almost got into the millennials. I think I'm an Xer, barely. But I got in there, and I just remember where they would look at us and be like, you could do anything. You can accomplish anything. And they kind of drilled that in our heads, and we kind of grew up I really believed that I could be an NBA basketball star. And it's not funny. That wasn't a joke. I really did believe that. But in reality, there's no way that I practiced. I practiced all the time. And I actually got really good. And I'm going to actually confess this. And I think my dad's probably going to see this sermon, but I've held this bitterness for a long time. But my dad, at my basketball hoop, I could hit every shot. I did not miss any shot. My dad put my hoop in at 9'8". So if you know anything about that, when you move up to a 10-foot basketball hoop where everyone else plays, I was horrible. I couldn't make a shot at all. So I've held that bitterness. I forgive my dad, but it's just one of those things. And so I share that all with you because if we don't know what our mission is, if we're not living that out, if we don't know what our role is in the church, then we often won't have a role. We don't think we're significant. We don't think we're part of this bigger picture. And so when we look at this, there's a couple things that I want to look at. Our roles is to introduce people to Christ. I'm going to review that we just talked about. Disciple them to become like Christ. In other words, to change, and teach them to repeat that process. So in other words, we're supposed to come to know Jesus, come follow him. We're supposed to be changed. We're supposed to be changed to something else, become disciples, be taught, and then we're supposed to repeat that to other people. That's our role. That's our purpose. And so my big question is, and like if we're going to look at a different direction, I kind of asked that question about the video. We kind of said, like, what would your video look like? If we had a blank space right now in your bulletin, you were going to list every way that you are reaching out to people, teaching them to be disciples, and teaching them to reproduce and do that to other people, what would you say? Like what in your process, in your purpose, because here's the thing, biblical study, Sunday school, all those things should be preparing us to do that. Like all the things that we're in, all the things, like when we come into worship here, when we sing songs, one of the biggest things that has kind of impacted me in the last year or so, last 2 years, is when we sing songs, I used to think it was kind of a time where you kind of got to come in and just lay everything out and just kind of spend time in God's presence. And even more than that now, what I believe is when you face trials, when you face situations, we sing those songs to prepare us for those moments, to be able to give praise to God in the good times, to be able to be reminded that he's our steadfast love, that we can be reminded that all we need is him, that we are no longer slaves to the junk in our lives. And so that's actually what kind of worship has become for me, is to prepare me in those moments. So even right now, as I'm preaching this sermon, I'm trying to prepare you so that you can go make disciples. If that's not our role, if that's not our purpose, no wonder we feel empty. No wonder we feel like the big church, maybe isn't accomplishing what it should. Because we're not living a life on mission. So this is our role, and our drive should be by the truth and gospel defined in the mission of God. And so what is the mission of God? And here's kind of where we're at. Like if you would look at the church right now, in the world, it's kind of a bleak outlook. Like when you look at, let's look at America's church. Okay, when you see the American church, where evangelical churches used to be the predominant churches across the nation, in the last 10 years, it has dropped dramatically. So much so, one of the stats that I saw on the Pew Research, it actually said that right now in the older generation, which would be probably 70 and older, 84% of those individuals say that they are born again believers. They believe Jesus Christ went to the cross. They made the commitment. They are church-going followers of Jesus Christ. In this younger generation, 43% say they believe in God. 43%. It's kind of cool to go to those websites and see all the stats, how it breaks down into age, how it breaks down into demographics, it breaks down into political parties, it breaks down into all those different things. And what you're going to be amazed at is you would think, oh, well, there's one side, or this side's going to be more, this side's going to be less. No, they're actually dropping at the same rate. Because the church is not grasping on to God's mission. I love in Ezekiel chapter 37 where God talks to the prophet, and he's pointing out that Israel has fallen away. They're no longer living for God. And so this is where it talks about the dry bones, where he says, the hand of the Lord was on me, and he brought me out of by his spirit. And he set me down in the middle of this valley. It was full of bones. He led me all around them. There was a great many of them on the surface of the valley, and they were very dry. Then he said to me, Son of man, can these bones live? And then in that vision, it talks about how flesh started to come on them. But he actually told him to preach to them, and all of a sudden flesh starts coming on to them. And then he says to him, this is what I'm going to do with Israel. I'm going to take this dead, dying people and raise them up for his glory. raise them up for his glory. That's God's desire. I have in my notes, when things seem bleak and hopeless, God shows up and breathes life into our situation. So what is the mission of God? A gospel-driven people for a gospel-impacted world. That is God's mission. A gospel-driven people, that's you and I, for a gospel-driven world. If we as people, if we can make Christ the center of our lives, if we can make his mission why we breathe, why we do what we do, what direction we're going as a church, as families, as couples, as whatever it might be, if that's the purpose of what we're doing, that God can take some dry bones and put some flesh on them again. Like he did this all throughout the Old Testament. He tried to use people. He used Adam and Eve, but we all know that they were selfish. They went after their own things. They did their own desires. They did all those things. He went to Abraham and he talked to Abraham, and Abraham was obedient, and he promised him that his people would be more than the stars in the sky and the sand on the shores. And he goes on in Genesis 12:1-3, the Lord said to Abram, "Go out from your land, your relatives, and your father's house to the land that I will show you. I will make you into a great nation. I will bless you. I will make your name great, and you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you. I will curse those who treat you with contempt, and all the peoples on earth will be blessed through you." And we all know that he did that through Jesus Christ. We all know that Christ came on a rescue mission to save people. And this should be the reality of the world that is motivating us. Because in reality, whatever motivated God to do what he did should be the thing that motivates us to do the things that we do. I don't know what is motivating you right now in your life to do the things that you do. Maybe it's security, maybe it's self-worth, maybe I don't know. Like like that's something that you would have to answer. Why do you do the things that you do? Why are you investing in the things that you're investing in? Why are you involved in the things that you're involved in? Is it because and we look at this, and I think sometimes we look at people like Adam and Eve, we look at Paul, we look at doubting Thomas, we look at these people and be like, man, if I was in that situation, I wouldn't have done that. I would have done what God told me to do, because we have all this foreknowledge and we figured everything out. But in reality, we do the same thing every day. Like, we know what God's purpose is. We know what his motives are. We know what he desires in our lives, yet we pick identity, we pick self-worth, we pick all these other things to keep us from accomplishing God's mission. And one of the greatest illustrations I ever saw of this is that we are adopted into God's family. And it's our role to carry on the family business. You ever think about that? Like, God's business is his business. God's purpose of why he is here carries on into our lives. I know a few of you that have taken over your parents' business, or you are trying to build a business for your kids, or you're trying to point them in the right track or whatever. But that's what God wants for us. He wants us to carry on his purpose and his mission. Whether it's halfway across the world when a missionary comes in and shows us their pictures, or we read the sign on the way out of our church building, the back of our sign says, "You are now entering your mission field." Like, do we believe that? If we believe that, then what are we doing to accomplish that? What pictures could we put up on this screen? What relationships are you purposely sharing Jesus Christ with? The third thing I have on your notes is to embrace God's mission. And maybe this is, like, I think a lot of this, we're like, yeah, we know this, whatever it might be. But maybe this is the challenge that we need to hear, is to embrace God's mission. God's on a mission to redeem and reconcile people to himself. That is That is what he wants. In Matthew 4:23 says Jesus was going all over Galilee, teaching in their synagogues, preaching the good news of his kingdom. But the issue is sometimes we don't feel God's mission, this grand mission, because we get bogged down by the details of our life. We get bogged down by our own missions, our own agendas, whatever it might be. We kind of we're the ones often that are hindering God's kingdom actually growing. And so this is I wanted to start off this, and this is why this is so important. I want to give you the two examples that I'm going to focus on this month. The first one is we're going to be doing a Thanksgiving dinner where we are going to be serving. We're not going to eat it. Like you might be a couple of you that sneak some turkey here and there and everywhere. But this isn't for us. This isn't for us to have a meal where we all sit together. We want to take as many meals to people who need them that we could just bless them with, that we could put a smile on their face, that might not get pumpkin pie otherwise. And the purpose we want to do that is so that we can drop it off and tell them that Christ loves them. We can tell them that there's a church that desires for them to come to grow, to be challenged, and to accomplish that mission. And so we need you to, number one, we need you to start thinking of those people that you can bless, thinking of the people that it could be your grandma, it could be a relative that you know, it could be the neighbor next door, it could be someone who really, really needs it. Like they really just need another meal. That's like literally what they need. Or it could be someone who doesn't need a meal, but just needs some loving. They just need to know that there's someone out there that just cares for them. It could be someone who doesn't know Jesus, that has no relationship with Christ in any way, shape, or form. It could be someone who's been a Christian for years and years and years, and they just need to be reminded that the church is still here. Like that's a simple way. Now, Love Inc., we're going to start talking about this, and we're going to talk about it more and more and more. I've already had a great example of this. They called me 2 weeks ago about putting in a water heater for a gentleman that lives right down the road. And so I called Ivan Mast, and I was like, hey, we need to go, because I wasn't going to move a water heater by myself. I was like, why don't we go, and we're going to move this water heater for us. So we literally took us, I think, 4 minutes to take this water heater, take it out, put the other one back in. But he comes over. He had to switch from his oxygen tank to his portable oxygen tank so he could come over. And we're like, do you want us to hook this up for you? And he's like, yeah. So Ivan and I went over to True Value, and we got to go over here. What's awesome about it, we got his water heater fixed. Like that's good. It's good to go. What's awesome is the guy has probably called me 10 to 12 times since just to talk. And I think normally I'd be like, the guy's called me 10 to 12 times just to talk. But honestly, it's been one of those things where, like, after I talked about living generously and it's kind of changed my perspective, where I want to show love. I want to show this man who I don't know, who I wouldn't have met unless I went and put a water heater in for him, that I have an opportunity to share Jesus with him. And he said he wants to come to church. He doesn't have a car. He doesn't drive. So I need someone that's willing to bring an old man to church, if someone would want to talk to me after that. But once again, what's the purpose? We want missions. We want opportunities like Love Inc. We want our Thanksgiving, or even any of our other big mission trips. But guys, we are called to be everyday missionaries right now. Here's the thing. Everything that I said, you have probably been like, okay, yeah. Because even as I'm writing this, I'm like, we know this. This is one of those things. But to actually live it out is counter-cultural. I have on my paper, it says culture tells us to be first. God says that last will be first and the first will be last. Culture tells us to step over others, to exalt yourself. God says humble yourself to be exalted. Culture says do whatever makes you look best. God says take the worst seat at the table instead of the best. Culture says your life is what is most important. God says consider others better than yourself. Culture says always get or do what you want. God says die to your own desires. Culture says take care of yourself. first and foremost, God says whoever loses his life will find it. Culture says maybe forgive, but don't forget. God says love and pray for your enemies. Culture says have nothing to do with those who are against you. God says bless those who persecute you. Culture says no one tells you what to do. God says go further than what you are asked. In God's kingdom, all these things are true. And if you want to answer the question, yes, our society is breaking down. Our culture is breaking down. We can watch the news, we can look at all those things, and we can just shake our heads in disgust. But the thing that is going to change that is not us getting a political leader. It is not us getting some kind of laws that are in favor of church morality. It's going to be the church being the church, doing the mission that he's calling us to do. I have on my notes the last line here. It says the ultimate aim of our lives is to bring glory to God because every single life lived on mission matters. Every single life. This isn't every single life that we save matters. Every single life, every single member, every single person of God's kingdom. That's you, that's me, that's my kids, that's my neighbor, that's my parents. That every person who professed Jesus Christ as their Lord and Savior, the things they do matter in God's kingdom. So let's get rid of the video. Let's get rid of the list of all those things. Maybe take a step back and just ask this question. Do you believe that you matter in God's story? Do you believe the decisions you're making, the things you're investing in, the way you interact with people, do you believe all of those things matter? Because they do. If we desire to see God's church move forward, then we kind of have to ask the question, what are we living for? Why am I doing the thing I do? Why am I doing church? Why am I doing Sunday school? Why am I doing Trail Life American Heritage Girls? Why am I doing Treasure Makers? Why am I doing all these things? And if there's a purpose behind that, then I guarantee you're going to be driven to accomplish more. It might mean you might find there's some things in your life that aren't really accomplishing that. There might be some things that are keeping you from accomplishing God's mission. And maybe that's where you need to kind of be like, do I need these things in my life? Can I remove these things or these relationships or whatever it might be? Because I want my life to reflect God's purpose. I want to live my life as a disciple. I want to change to be more like him, and I want to take as many people with me as possible. Once again, not in your power, not in your ability, not in your things, but what God can do in and through you. I'm going to have the praise band come on back up. And this morning, if you've never given your life to Christ, I'm going to have Justin will be out in the foyer as one of our elders. You can come see him and kind of just talk to him. And if you've never given your life to Christ, we'd love to start that conversation. If you've never been baptized and died to your old self to live a new life, we want to encourage you to do that and talk with you about that. If you just need prayer, just simply see him or anyone. Just grab someone and say, hey, will you pray for me? So this morning, let's sing this song and just kind of bring glory to God.